it's an honor.
And it's an honor to lift our voice and sing
To the living God.
to the living God.
No one can deny.
No one can deny
That Jesus Christ.
Jesus Christ is the Most High.
Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go.
Video. How many of you can identify with that video? Amen. Well, it always seemed like we're waiting on something in order to get to this place where we're completely at peace. The word that they use in this video is contentment. That I'm content, that I'm at peace with what's going on in my life. How many of you guys can identify with that feeling of things are just not right yet? I got to get just a little bit more. I've got to do just a little bit more. And once I get to this next level at the job, or once I get this new furniture, once I get this next car, once I get this next house, then we're going to get there. We've been studying all these things that take away from our peace. And we've gone through several S words. You know, I'm a pastor, so I've got the disease where either I have to use the same letter in the front or it's got a rhyme or something like that. You know how we do it. But we've looked in Philippians chapter 4, and we've gone through each verse in Philippians chapter 4. And listen, here's the amazing thing. By the time we get to the end of this series, we would have covered all of Philippians chapter 4. And all of Philippians, listen, Philippians chapter 4 has everything that you need to deal with every situation and every sacrifice that you have to make, every circumstance that the enemy throws at you. No matter how hard your lot in life is, Philippians has the answer to it. And so we've been going through it verse by verse. And this week, as I was studying this week, and I began to look at verses 10 through 13 and what Paul was saying to us and what he's saying to us today, I began to reminisce on some childhood television. And I don't know how many of you guys grew up. I know most of you guys are in my age group or a little bit older than me. So you're going to be very familiar with this TV show. But this TV show is called Sanford and Son. Now, the kids in the house may not be familiar with it, but listen, I grew up on Sanford and Son, right? And Sanford and Son, listen to me, it is a parody, right? It's almost a farce, right? You think about it. What person would make their house into a junkyard? It's supposed to be a comedy, right? You're supposed to look at it and you're supposed to think, listen, who would put their life so focused on collecting other people's junk that it would be in every room of their house? You remember Sanford Son? You're looking at it, he had all these different things, got Lamont and all this stuff going on, and then he's got the table that you hit the side of it and the drawer pop out the side, and it's Fred G. Sanford, and the G keeps changing every episode. You know what I'm talking about, right? But it's a parody. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to show you what it means to be a part of a materialistic society. That's the undercurrent to that story. You missed it, didn't it? Who would bring that much junk into their house? And as I began to look around at my house, there's no space on counters. My garage is full of stuff. My attic is full of stuff. My yard is full of stuff. As I look around at my neighbors, we've got cars in the driveway, cars in the garage, cars on the street. We've got stuff everywhere, stuff in every part of our house. And as I begin to look around where we are now as a culture, as Americans, I'm not so sure that we don't look like an episode of Sanford and Son. That we've gotten so much after materials. Think about what he's saying now. He said, this is my life. I've got to collect junk and I've got to keep junk just in case I need it. And this is my value, right? This is how I make my money. This is how my net worth is. Let me talk to somebody today. Your net worth is in no way connected to your value. You're more than any possessions that you have. You're more than any stuff that you have. Listen, you no longer, I'm freeing somebody today. You no longer have to try to achieve X amount of level or position or or be at a certain place or do a certain thing or be a certain kind of mom. Listen, God has equipped you. He's given you everything that you need. And the problem that we have, and this is the problem that we have throughout our entire society, is that it is so easy to compare now. Because listen, we look around, we're doing more than just visiting the guy who lived on the acre beside us. We've got people that stay right beside us. We know when the folk beside us get the new car. We know when they build the new deck. We know it. And it's amazing. Listen, I talk to these guys who go out and do repairs on houses, and they put the sign in the front yard. You know why they put the sign in the front yard? Because when you see that your neighbor is adding something on his house, you want to do the same thing. And you've been in these neighborhoods where one gazebo after the next gazebo after the next gazebo is built, and each one gets a little bigger and a little grander. And that is where we are as a country, right? And that's where we are as people today. Materialism, it drives everything. Facebook determines everything. Instagram determines everything. What people have determines how I'm going to feel each day. And God didn't want that. Matter of fact, so much of Jesus' teachings, so much of Paul's teachings are about this thing called covetousness. Let's look at what Jesus has to say about this. Today I'm going to start talking to you about, we got to get to a place where we can make contentment, being content, greater than stuff. We got to get to the place in our life where we can appreciate the things that we have. We can appreciate the God that we have. We got to get to the place where those things, our family, our children, our siblings, those things that God has given us become so important that we're not out there trying to get more stuff and trying to get extra stuff and more stuff. Listen, one of the fastest growing industries in the United States is self-storage. Listen to this. $37 billion will be spent on self-storage.
Yeah. Amen.
My guess is very close to your house is a self-storage unit, right? You got a bank, you got a gas station, and you probably got a self-storage unit very close to your house, because we are just collecting stuff. And listen, once stuff gets into the self-storage unit, it hardly ever makes its way back out. It's just junk. And this is the lot in life. We get to the end of life, and you got a lot of people who really loved you and who really wanted to spend just a little bit more time with you, who really wanted to know that you cared just a little bit more, standing over your storage unit and trying to figure out what to do with this junk. And what Jesus does is he wants to save us from this. What Jesus does, he wants to communicate to us that we need to get away from that, because he knows that this pursuit of junk, that this pursuit of stuff ultimately pulls us away from him. Let's look at what Jesus says. First of all, in Luke chapter 12, verse 15, Jesus is talking to his disciples. He says, take heed and be aware. Pay attention and be cautious. Don't just look at it. You need to understand that the thing that you're looking at, it can cause you great danger. It can separate you from your family. It can stand in the way of your happiness. It can stand in the way of your peace. Pay attention to it. But you need to be aware of it, of this covetousness. Jesus reaches all the way back to the Old Testament. He reaches all the way back to Exodus 20 and 17. He reaches all the way back to the Big Ten, the Ten Commandments, the last one. And it says that we're not supposed to covet our neighbors. In other words, we're not supposed to want the things that we see other people have. And I know immediately we started thinking about, we're not supposed to want their wife, and we're not supposed to want their children. We're not supposed to want their slaves. But that is so top of the iceberg. But beneath that top of the iceberg is their car, is their house, is their job. We shouldn't want whatever somebody else has, because when we get into this place where we want what other people have, then what we're really saying is, God, what you've given me is not sufficient. And I always tell people, listen, you may think that the grass is greener on the other side, but you don't know until you get out there. And let me tell you something, green grass requires a big water bill. And if you're not ready to invest and do the things that made the grass green on the other side. You need to be happy with your little brown grass and green grass. You need to work on getting your weeds out the yard. You need to focus on your own family, on your own car, on your own wife. And we need to stay away from comparing. And your pastor has to really work on this. Because sometimes I look around at other ministries and I think, well, they were here about year four. Why aren't we here, God? Why haven't you blessed us? You know why? Sometimes I look at things going on within my life. And I've only had but one time to say to my wife, hey, my mom used to do that, and she straightened that out real quick, right? But we don't need to compare. We don't need to get to a place, because every time we get into this place of comparing, it always leads to this covenant spirit. And once that covenant spirit gets on you, you cannot be happy with what God is doing for you. You are constantly looking at Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all these different social media sites. And I think social media is great. It's an awesome way to advance the ministry. It's an awesome way to stay in contact with each other. But when social media leads to you lacking peace, it's gone too far, right? And what Jesus says, for one's life does not consist of the abundance of the things he possesses. He says, your life can't be about possessions. And then Jesus goes on to do this parable. And it's one of the parables I think that misses the church often. And, you know, we get caught up in just a few parables, but there's this parable of the rich fool. That's what it's called. Yeah. And basically what he talks about is this man who's been blessed, and his field is producing. He's a farmer, and his field starts to produce so much harvest. And instead of him taking the harvest and either sacrificing it, giving glory to God, or giving it to somebody else, he tears down his old barn and he builds a bigger barn. He gets blessed at work, and instead of him helping somebody else, he adds a room onto his house. He gets he's got this stuff. He gets a new couch. And instead of him giving the new couch to somebody without a couch, he goes and gets a storage unit, and he puts the couch into the storage unit. And what Jesus is trying to communicate in this parable, that if you put God first, you would see the needs around you. And listen, the reason why I'm blessing you is so that you can be a blessing to somebody else. I'm not blessing you so you can put stuff in a storage unit and never see it again. Amen. I'm not moving on your behalf. I'm not getting you promotions so that you can buy a whole bunch of stuff and put it into an attic and never see it again. But take that stuff out the attic and get it to people who need it. And listen, the more you do that, the more I'm going to give you. Amen. And what God comes back, and that's why they call it the parable of the rich fool. He comes to this guy and he says, fool. What that word fool means is man who doesn't believe in me. Man who thinks that he got all this stuff, all this harvest. Because listen, the guy down the street from you, he planted seeds too, but he didn't get the same harvest that you got. But it was through my grace and my mercy that you have what you have. And when you begin to try to hoard that and begin to try to build, all these different storage areas for it and keep it, what you're saying is, God, I don't trust you. I don't believe that you're going to continue to bless me. What I believe is I'm going to keep this old TV with the big back on it that Goodwill won't even take. I'm going to keep that in storage, because one day this TV that you blessed me with, the flat screen TV on the wall, it may break and I may have to wheel this old TV out again. And let me talk to somebody now. You ain't ever bringing that TV out again. Get rid of that television. Find somebody who needs it and give it to them. Because whereas you only do flat screen now because you on that next level now. There's some folk who are out there with no television, and they would love that television that you have, that flat screen. Now get somebody to help you because it's heavy. Get somebody to help you. But get it to somebody is what Jesus is saying in this parable. Matter of fact, he comes to this guy and he says, fool, I'm taking you tonight. He literally kills this guy. And then he says, now, who's going to have your stuff now? Who's going to take over all the stuff that you work for now? Because listen, because you didn't focus on me, I'm taking you away from it. And then I'm just giving it away. No, just whoever wants it can have it. Jesus really gets into this on the Sermon on the Mount. And when we look at the Sermon on the Mount, we're talking about some of Jesus' richest teachings. Matter of fact, everything Jesus teaches throughout the rest of the time he's on earth starts out in seed form on the side of this mountain. And what Jesus says in the very final thing, listen, the first thing he always says is very important. Everything in the middle is very important. But I pay very close attention to the last thing he says, because I believe that when we're going out of this door, he's leaving us with something. And at the end of his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus begins to talk about, guess what? Stuff. And look what he says. He says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. Don't buy a whole bunch of stuff. You don't have to upgrade every time the new phone comes out. Listen, if your phone is working and there's no new feature that's going to make a difference in your life, just keep the phone that you have. But listen, if you decide to upgrade, give the old phone away. Because we got junk on top of junk, 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 in a closet full of junk. And we don't need any more junk. And what Jesus is trying to communicate to us is that the junk, these things that we lay up, these treasures that we lay up on earth, they begin to pull us away from the God in heaven. And he says, don't lay up your treasures on earth. And this Greek word for earthly treasures literally means riches, possessions, property, and stuff. And listen to me, I want to stop for a second and make this clear. Jesus doesn't want your stuff. I know we get to a place where we think Jesus don't want us to have fun. Jesus don't want us to have stuff. No, Jesus, I don't know about this Jesus thing, because it feels like Jesus he just want me sitting somewhere with nothing. That's not it at all. No. Jesus wants you to have joy. Amen. And Jesus wants you to have peace. Amen. And Jesus wants you to be happy throughout your life. And he knows that when you get into this materialistic life and you're all about stuff, and you've got to have the new phone, and you've got to have the new car, and you've got to have the promotion right now. He knows that that's going to rob your happiness, and the enemy is going to use that to take away the peace that's inside of your mind and inside of your heart. And what he says is don't go out and collect a whole bunch of stuff. Don't make your house look like Sanford and Son. Don't go out and get all this stuff, because guess what? The stuff is worthless. Moths, a little bitty moth can come in and destroy your fabric, stuff that you pay hundreds of dollars for, thousands of dollars for, and this little bitty bug comes in and destroys it because it's worthless. He said moths and rust. You go out and you spend all this money on a car. Now, they barely make cars out of metal now, so we don't have to hardly worry about rust. But we go out and we buy all this stuff, and look, it breaks and is no good, and years from now, it doesn't mean anything. And if I ask you right now, what is it that you got for the last 3 birthdays? You probably couldn't tell me, right? What is it that you got for the last 3 Christmases? You probably couldn't spit it off real quick, because it's just stuff. He said it's just stuff that people can break in and steal and take from you, and then you lose it, and once it's broken or once it's gone, all of a sudden you lack peace, right? He says, but instead, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And now this word treasures in heaven is the same word for treasure, but when we put the heaven on it, we change exactly what the things are. So now all of a sudden we're talking about this thing called grace and mercy, and we're talking about favor, and we're talking about strength. And the wonderful thing about this heavenly treasure is that it's available to you now and later. It is eternal. Like, you can tap into it now, every day of your life, or you can tap into it later. The bad thing about these earthly treasures, listen, when they put you inside of that casket, none of what you have goes with you.
None. That's right. Nothing.
And so what Jesus begins to say is we need to focus, instead of focusing on junk and stuff and acquiring more possessions, we need to focus on how do we build up these heavenly treasures? How do we forgive people more? How do we go out and serve people more? How do we stand in the gap for people more? How do we pray for people more? How do we follow God more? How do we begin to store up? Listen, I want a storehouse full of heavenly treasures. And what he begins to communicate to us is, he says, for where your treasure is, it's very important for you to understand, there your heart will be also. And this word for heart is cardia, and it's very, very close to the word that we use for heart today. But what this word means, it doesn't mean that thing that's beating on the inside of you, that the heart that we have inside of our body, the physical heart. This talks about your spiritual heart, and it talks about your mental heart. And what he's saying is, where your treasure is, when it's all about the job, when it's all about, getting the promotion, then your mind, your character, your intentions, everything becomes all about the job, and everything becomes all about the promotion, and everything around you is impacted by this treasure. And what he's saying is, when this treasure is about God, is about a godly treasure, then everything around you becomes about serving others, becomes about praising God and lifting others up. And what Jesus is saying is, all you have to do is look at your actions. Because your actions are going to tell you whether you're focused on earthly treasures or heavenly treasures. When you get to church late, but you get in line for the iPhone, it tells us that you're focused on earthly treasures instead of heavenly treasures. Let's go a little bit further. He says, very important part right here. He says, no one can serve two masters. He says, for either he will hate the one and love the other. Either you're going to love God or you're going to love earthly possessions. It's impossible for you to try to walk that line. And see, that's the challenge for us, especially, in the land of the free. We go out in town, bootstraps, and we work hard, and we can get a whole bunch of stuff. And on the back of the money, it says, in God we trust. But nothing else talks about God after the money. He says he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. He says you cannot serve God and mammon. And this word mammon in the Greek, it really points to the same stuff as earthly treasures. It blew my mind when I looked up this word in the Greek. It basically is riches, possessions, property, and stuff. Now, in many versions, we just put money in because really that's really what we get caught at. It's really about money. It's really about keeping stuff so we don't have to spend more money. It's really about having my money, hoarding my money, and making more money and getting more money. That's really what it's about. But it really equates to the earthly stuff above. And what Jesus is saying, we can't be in a place where we serve both of these. Now, what Jesus is not saying is that you can't have stuff and that you can't have earthly possessions and that he won't bless you. Listen, Jesus doesn't want you not to have stuff, doesn't want you to pursue. He's not telling anybody, stop trying to get a promotion. He's not saying that. But when it gets to a place to where you wake up in the morning and you're so tired that you can't get out of bed, because you're working so hard and working so many hours and working so many jobs so that you can pay your note. And when you get to the end of the month and you got more month than money left every month, or you get to the place where you want to help somebody and you can't help them because you need help yourself, or you get to the place where you can't tithe, like you really can't tithe, like I want to tithe, but I can't tithe because I have spent too much money on mammon. And that's what he's talking about. And I'm going to put the mirror in front of you for a second because that's where a lot of us are today. We use tithing as a battleground, and this is not a tithing sermon. I'm not trying to prime you or pump you for tithing. I just want to make sure that you understand that your issue is not with theology. You don't have a theological issue when it comes to giving money to the church. You've either gotten too much mammon, and now you can't afford 10%. You're in the danger zone. 10%, if you're in a position where 10% is too much for you to give, you've spent too much. You're serving other gods. You're working to give your money to stuff. That's what you're doing. If you're at a place where 10% literally makes a difference every month, if a dime out of a dollar makes a difference in whether or not you're going to be able to pay your bill. You already in mammon. You already serving other things. You've already got too much stuff. You're already focused on the wrong things. You're already separated from God in a lot of areas of your life. You don't have to believe me. Just take some time and think about it.
That's good.
And the other person is the person that says, well, I don't want to give my money to that church, or I don't trust, so I don't want it. No, really what it is that you want your money for yourself. So let's go a little bit further. I like the way Jesus kind of breaks this down, right? But he talks about this heavenly treasure, and he talks about this earthly treasure. And to me, it's just a little churchy, right? It's just terms that don't make sense necessarily in modern day. And so I went back to Paul, and Paul, he's talking to the Hebrew church. And you need to understand let me give you some context here, because Paul is talking to people who were Jews, who worship God, who understood the 10 Commandments. And so what Paul does is he reaches all the way back, just like Jesus. When Jesus is talking to the Jews, he reaches all the way back into Exodus, and he pulls out this word covenant, right? And look what Paul says. He says, let your conduct be without covetousness. Don't you be a person out there with material gain always on your mind. Don't just be out there collecting junk and flaunting your junk. And this was very important, because these Jews who have not given their life to Christ would be really like the frontline evangelists, people going out and talking to a world of Gentiles. Most of them would have been orphans. Most of them would have been widows. Most of them would have been poor. And so when we pull up in our brand new car with the rims and we look all good, got on all of our good smelling cologne and we got on our new clothes and we got our Louis Vuitton purse and all that stuff, and we go down and serve, we lose some effectiveness, is what what Paul is trying to explain to this Hebrew church. We need to remember that this covenant thing is a commandment from God. God doesn't want us in a place where we look like we care more about possessions than God. And he says, but instead, what I want you to do is I want you to learn how to be content. And I looked up this word for content in the Greek, and it literally means be satisfied. Be at peace with what God has given you. Be happy with the children that God has given you. Be at peace in the house that God has put you in. Be happy with the job that God has given you. Listen, I've got friends that have been looking for jobs over a year now. You better be happy with that job you got. It may not be perfect. Sure, there are opportunities for you to advance, but be thankful for what you have while you have it. Amen. And what he says is that we gotta be content with the things that we have. And why are we content? For he, talking about Jesus himself, has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. You don't have to worry about anything. You can have peace with what you have. You don't have to worry about that TV going out. You don't have to worry about anything, because the TV goes out. I am a God that can afford to help you get another television. You don't have to keep all those TVs anymore. You can trust me. You can be happy with what you have. You can be content with what you have, because I am God. I am with you. And listen, when it really comes down to is that of all the possessions that you have, the most valuable possession that all of us need is God. And what Jesus is saying is, you've got me. Amen. Don't worry about anything else. So I started to look at these. And what the Bible is showing us is that you've got these two different areas that we can go. Each of us, every day, we have a decision. We can either live in contentment or we can live in covetousness. If we live in contentment, we're basically saying, Jesus, you are the focus of my life. I do everything every day of my life in order to build up heavenly treasures. Everything that I do, I'm helping others. I'm going out, I'm serving, I'm praising you, I'm worshiping you, I'm putting you first. In this covenant thing, it's all about me. It's all about my stuff. I need more stuff. I need more. Give me more. I need more. In this commitment, in this contentment, it's all about eternal things. Whereas in covetousness, everything is temporal. Everything on this earth is temporal. Everything is going to fade. It's going to be destroyed. It can be stolen. In this eternal thing, listen, the enemy cannot steal your grace. He cannot steal your peace. The enemy cannot steal your mercy. In this contentment, you get strength. No matter what you're going through, no matter what your circumstances are, no matter what you lose, no matter what you gain, you have strength. But inside of this covenant thing, you're always weak because you're always thinking about other stuff. You can't even focus on the stuff that you have. You can't even enjoy the stuff that you have because you're too focused on the other stuff that you don't have. In this contentment thing, you get contentment. There's nothing like it. Like I couldn't make you anything. Like if I could give you anything, any gift, the gift of contentment would be the best gift that I can give you, because if you can be content with the things that God has given you, it ushers in peace. It ushers in health. It ushers in happiness. It ushers in joy. It ushers in a closer relationship with God, because now all of a sudden you realize that everything that you have is because of a God who loves you. And now you worship different, and now you praise different. But in this covenant world, all you get is discontent. Never happy, never satisfied. And let me just say this to you. Listen, you will never get enough possessions, not even in your storage unit, not in your yard, not in your house. Now, if you buy 10 houses, now if you buy 1,000 houses and fill them up with junk, you will never have enough stuff to fill the hole in your heart that only Christ can fill. You'll never be happy enough. You'll never have enough. And all I have to do is look over my career. And I always was saying, if I can just get to the next level, I won't have to go any further. I have everything I need. I have all my bills paid. I have all my needs met. And when I got to the next level, what I realized is that it still wasn't enough. And when I got to the next level, I thought I'd have just enough. I just get a little bit more. If I can just go a little bit further. And I got to the next level. And guess what I learned? It's never enough. You'll never have enough money. You'll never have enough stuff. Listen, but when you make Jesus the center of your life, you have everything that you need. And so what comes out of that is peace. When I get to this place of contentment, where I'm happy with what I have, where I'm serving others, where I'm taking the stuff that I no longer need and I'm doing the right thing with it, and I'm blessing others, I get this peace that I can't even explain. It surpasses all understanding. But when I'm covetousness, when I live in this covet, and I'm always wanting something, I'm always comparing myself to somebody else, and I'm always upset with what I have, I'm never at peace. And so our equation for this week, very simple equation, is we've got to get to the place where we make being content, where we make being happy with the things that we have greater than the stuff that we don't have and the stuff that we have and that's sitting around, that's broken, or whatever the case may be. And what Paul does in Philippians 4, verses 10 through 13, is he begins to teach us how do we do that. And he starts out by saying, I rejoice in the Lord greatly that once again you renewed your care for me. You were in fact concerned about me, but lacked the opportunity to show it. And as I studied this last night in my meditation, God began to show me how this peace thing was so much in Paul that even as you notice here, that even as the people are slow to respond to the fact that he's going through trouble, he's still at peace. Wow. Paul is sitting in a prison. We don't know if he's in a home prison at this time or in prison when he writes these letters. But at any rate, he's sitting in prison. He's sending out letters to people, letting them know he sent all these letters out to the Philippians. And finally, at the very end of Philippians, the fourth letter he sends, he has finally received something back from the people. And Paul immediately begins to say, but I'm at peace with that. And I don't know about you, because I've been in situations where I helped folk out, and when I got into the bad situation and they weren't quick to respond, or they didn't return my phone call, or they didn't let me know that they were in my corner, it really hurt me, right? It really caused me to get in this place of no peace. But Paul is at a level in his religion and in his trust and in his faith where he understands that all the circumstances, everything's in God's control. I'm no longer having to rely on a human to do anything for me. Nobody has to pat me on the back. Nobody has to call me, return my text. Nobody has to do anything for me to find happiness. I'm happy and content in the Lord. He says, I don't say this out of need, for I have learned to be content. Listen, contentment is something that you have to learn. Covetousness, you don't have to learn. Listen, you will naturally want what somebody else has. You're born that way. Children at a very small age, they want the one toy that the other child is playing with. It's not something that you taught them. It's something that's born inside of you. But being content, being happy with what you have, that's something that we all have to learn. He says, I've learned to be content in whatever circumstance I am. And I like the fact that Paul calls out circumstances here, because sometimes we can be real content when things ain't hard. You know, we can be just happy when things aren't hard. But when things get tough, man, in our lives, we lose contentment. When things get tough in our marriage, we start saying, man, oh, Susie's husband, he's so wonderful, he's so great. We begin to covet what somebody else has, and that always puts us on the path of discontent, right? He goes a little bit further in verse 12. Verse 12 and 13, he says, I know both how to have a little, and I know how to have a lot. In all circumstances, I have learned the secret to being content. He says, I know what it's like to have a little bit of something. See, Paul comes from this place where he was a religious leader. So Paul was wealthy. Paul led people. He had people that worked for him. He had people that served him. He knows what it's like to have a whole lot of stuff. And now he's sitting in a jail cell. And he says, I've learned what it's like to have a little. And what happens a lot of times when we think about these verses, we think about people without. But listen, there are people with who struggle. I know people who have a whole lot of kids, and they're having trouble finding peace and being content with their whole lot of kids. And I know people who don't have any kids, and they are having trouble trying to find peace in the fact that they don't have any kids. And what Paul is saying, whether you got a whole lot of money or a little bit of money, whether you got a whole lot of children or a little bit of children, whether you got no car, whether Uber's your friend, or whether you got 10 cars, you need to understand what it means to be happy with whatever you have, no matter what you have. He says the secret. Now this is the secret sauce, guys. He says I've learned the secret of being content. He says whether I've got a whole lot of food or whether I don't have any food at all, whether I've got an abundance or whether I'm in need. He says the thing that I've learned throughout the course of my life. I started out persecuting the church. I started out, killing Christians. He said, and now I'm in jail for being a Christian. He said, I've been through this life that you could not imagine. And what I've learned through all my ups and downs, through all my issues, when my friends walked away from me, when I was hurt, when people left me for dead, literally, when I was stoned, he said, throughout my whole life, when I was shipwrecked, everything that I went through, he said, I've learned the secret. What's the secret, Paul? I can do anything. I can do all things. It doesn't matter what the circumstance is in my life. I can get through anything. I don't care what I lose in this season. I don't care what stuff I have to maintain. I don't care what they take from me. I don't care what they give me. Listen, they're not going to give me something that's going to pull me away from God. They're not going to take something away from me that's going to pull me from God. He said, I've learned the secret to being content, and that is in every situation in my life, I've got a Christ that's right there with me. He'll never leave me alone. He'll always stand with me, no matter how far I fall. His arms are long enough to reach down into the pit where I am and pull me out and set me on strong and solid foundation. Doesn't matter what's going on in my life. I understand the secret. That's why Paul says, I can rejoice in all things, because it doesn't matter what happens. I can rejoice at the funeral just as much as I can rejoice when the baby's born. Yeah. Amen. Because I've got a Christ that's with me in all things of my life. He says I can be kind in every situation. I don't care how people treat me. You don't have to treat me a certain way for me to then be kind to you. I can be kind because I know in all things I've got a Christ, and he'll judge you. He'll take care of you. And I'm not praying against you. I'm just letting it go. Yeah. He says I don't have to worry about anything. You don't have to worry about being in jail. You're in jail right now. You don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about anything. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray, and I'm going to take requests to God, and I'm going to be thankful for what I have. Why, Paul? Because I've got Christ with me. And regardless of the situation, I don't care how bad it looks, Christ is with me. And because Christ is with me, I can do all things. He says, I can focus on things that are pure, and I can change, and I can be the person that Christ has called me to be. Why? Because I've got Christ living inside of me. The Holy Spirit is inside of me. I don't have to do the things I saw growing up no more. I don't have to be the person that I don't want to be no more. I can be Christ on this earth right now. I can live like Christ. I can live like Paul. I can do the right thing. I can let go of that addiction. Listen, that addiction has no power over me because I've got Christ inside of me. That pain, it has no power over me right now because I understand that inside of me is something that's greater than in the entire world. I understand that me plus God, me plus Jesus is a majority in every situation in my life. It doesn't matter what the circumstances look like. I can have peace regardless because I know I've got a Christ that is much more valuable than any stuff I could ever get. Look what Isaiah says. Isaiah says, you will keep him, talking about God, you will keep him in what? Perfect peace. Who wants to be in perfect peace? You will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you. When we focus on storing up heavenly treasures instead of earthly possessions and earthly treasures, when we focus our mind on God, God has promised through Isaiah that he will send us in perfect peace. How many of you today can imagine that?
Yeah, amen.
That if you could just separate yourself from the stuff that you've been running after, from the possessions that you've been running after, if you could just separate yourself from the earthly stuff, that you can begin to see peace. How many of you today, if you would just let go of that earthly thing that's tying you up, would have better relationship with your children? How many of you today, if you just let go of this earthly thing that you've been after, you've been running after this earthly thing and you've been trying to be first in this earthly thing, but if you could just let that one thing go, how much difference would that make in your marriage? How many of you today that if peace could come in, like literally tomorrow, and you could look around and be content with everything, could get to a place in their life where they understand how good it is to be a child of God? How many of you today can honestly say that there's some things that are literally separating you from everything that God has promised you? Because I want to talk to you. I want to tell you that you no longer have to be running behind earthly possessions. Like you literally can make a decision today that you're going to put God first and doing the things of God most important in your life. Like you can make that decision right now. And as you make that decision, peace begins to usher in. You can let go of some things. Listen, it's okay. How many of you want to get to the end of your life and have people to come around and say, listen, because of this heavenly treasure that you left, I'm a different person. I'm a changed person. I'm a different place. My family's in a different place because of something that you did. Because that's really what's at stake today. What's at stake today is, will we be people who are content with what God is doing, people who worship God first, who put him as the center of our lives, or will we focus on worldly possessions and earthly possessions like everybody else? Literally, I mean, what I'm talking about is countercultural. You're going to look different. You're going to be different. But the peace that you'll get for this difference, it'll be worth all the sacrifices that you have to make. So this week, I want you focused on this. You need to understand this. Peace doesn't come from having what I want. Peace comes from wanting what I have. Peace will never come out of your discontent, out of your wanting what you saw or what you saw somebody else with or what you don't have. Peace will come out of being thankful, being happy for the God that you have and for the stuff that he's blessed you with. To God be the glory. Amen.
Here we stand in the presence of our Savior.
It's an honor
And it's an honor to lift our voice and sing
to the living God.
to the living God.
No one can
No
deny
one can deny
that Jesus
that
Christ
Jesus Christ is